Anyway, one thing I forgot to do last week was correct myself on something from the week before.
How could?
Make sure this isn't recorded. Because I said that Kant was a Frenchman, and that's not true. He was a German. So, verified that and realized I was wrong, so that is my correction for that. But anyway, when it comes to chapter 7, I guess we'll fly through these and get the discussion going.
I'm sure to go at normal speed. Speaking just for myself, I have no time.
Okay. Well, I kind of do.
Okay, but yeah, are you still going to Emily's for her birthday?
Well, okay, I was talking with her initially, and we were kind of going back and forth on it, but she's doing something with her kids today. So, I wanted to celebrate with her, but it's just not going to work today, so maybe we'll do something. Maybe not, I don't know.
Okay. Alright, chapter 7.
Okay.
Chapter 7. Impressive.
So,
wow.
Might be a little bit of a short class, but that's okay.
It's okay.
Alright.
Yeah, these last couple chapters were a doozy.
They were great.
Yeah, it's very funny. So chapter 7 starts, and it starts off with Berlioz' roommate, Stiopa, and he wakes up all hungover, and then he says, we are then told that there have been some very strange occurrences happening in this apartment over the last few years. So some residents are disappearing, which is coinciding with the main theme of the book that we talked about in class 1. And one of the housekeepers even suspected some kind of witchcraft shortly before she also disappeared. And as we all know, this is basically a direct one-to-one comparison of what was going on in the Soviet Union. And Bulgakov is drawing a parallel between the work of the secret Russian police and the work of the devil. So definitely controversial for the time. So the book then says that Stiopa is suffering from a headache. And when he asks the now deceased Berlioz for aspirin, because he doesn't know he's dead yet, he opens his eyes to find a strange man dressed in black standing right in front of him in his room. And it should be noted that in chapter 2, Pontius Pilate also was suffering from a headache as well. There's a couple reasons for this. We could talk about it later, but this could just be Bulgakov showing the negative side effects of being in a position of power, since Stiopa is the director of the Variety Theater in Moscow. Or this could just be the result of being in a climate of intense spiritual warfare or being in the presence of the devil. I don't really know, but I would love to hear everybody else's thoughts on that later. Now, the mysterious man, who at this point we know is Voland, he tells Stiopa that he's been waiting for an hour because the two had previously arranged a meeting. And Voland then tells him the way to treat a hangover is just to drink more. And then Stiopa sees a stranger already prepared a tray with luxury food and vodka. And the stranger introduces himself as Voland, as we already know. And he introduces himself as a professor of black magic, just like he did with the two characters in chapter 1. And he kind of takes advantage of Stiopa's current condition to kind of manipulate and reprogram his memories. So Voland then shows him a contract that Stiopa sees his signature on, and doesn't even bother arguing with it, although he does call another theater director, Rimsky, to verify it, and Rimsky affirms that all of Voland's claims. So basically this is Voland trying to get an in to the theater so he can perform a black magic show, as we'll see in the coming chapters. And it should also be noted that Voland is leveraging the economic bureaucracy to kind of weasel his way into the social fabric of the Soviet Union. So Stiopa calls Grunya, who was the maid, the housekeeper, and he asks why there is a giant cat and a tall man in the apartment. And Voland says that he sent Grunya on vacation. Now, Stiopa is kind of bewildered when he sees the giant cat eating food and drinking vodka in the apartment. And this is kind of more his surreal humor, I suppose, Bulgakov, that is. And it's kind of a throwback to the dinner party where everybody is indulging themselves, and since the cat is a demon, thus showing that corrupt people behave like demons. Now, it's also worth noting that Voland isn't really strong-arming Steopa in any way, but he's rather kind of subtly manipulating him and taking advantage of his current condition to get his way. So now the tall man is scolding Steopa for being hungover and taking advantage of his position of power. And at this point, a fanged red-haired character, Azazelo, appears, and he goes on about how he can't understand how Steopa got this leadership position at the theater in the first place. So Steopa's psyche is being kind of pulled in multiple directions, and these accusations show their targeting of Steopa is connected to his past sins, meaning through Steopa's past sins he's kind of given the demons rights over him. So suddenly the cat yells scat, and then Steopa is knocked out and wakes up in a coastal town of Yalta. And this is a paranormal transportation or teleportation to a different place without warning or reason. And it's reminiscent of people in the Soviet Union and how they would often disappear and just get shipped off to Siberia for whatever reason. So after he disappears and gets teleported, Chapter 8 starts. And Chapter 8 begins with Ivan waking in the clinic, so we're back with him, and being attended by a female orderly. And one small but meaningful thing she does is she lets a little bit of sunlight in the room, kind of like Florence Nightingale. And this symbolizes the illumination of his worldview with the understanding of what was happening. And so it's almost like his worldview is being expanded now, and he's becoming more real in a way. And although he still has a long way to go. So when he is taken to the examination room, he chooses to stay silent and not rave about the crazy professor and Pontius Pilate and his encounter with Voland at Patriarch's Pond, because he tried that before and nothing really all that good came of it. So, and the sterile, soulless environment of the clinic was drying out his spirit. This is kind of a microcosm of what was happening at a larger scale in the society that he was living in, just kind of a sterile, soulless society. So after the exam, then he goes back to his room, where shortly after the head doctor, Dr. Stravinsky, he expresses to his colleagues that Ivan might have schizophrenia, which was a very common diagnosis back then. So when the doctor asks Ivan about his profession, Ivan's disposition becomes more and more despairing and despondent, because he now realizes that most of his work in terms of writing was completely manufactured and propaganda, just like the writer in Chapter 6, who realized that most of what he was doing was inauthentic. So then he also goes on to tell the doctor that he's not crazy, and he lays out the story of the weird professor accurately predicting the death of his friend. And Ivan has had a rude spiritual awakening in this chapter that I would love to hear everybody's thoughts on later. As Ivan continues to tell the story of how Voland was there at Yashua's trial, Dr. Stravinsky is showing him some very professional sympathy. And that being said, Ivan is kind of subtly being persuaded into thinking that it might just be easier to believe that he's just going crazy rather than actually believing that this was all real. And then he has a conversation with the doctor that we can get to later if anybody wants to. But the conversation is more or less about whether he should stay at the clinic or whether he's eligible for release. So Ivan agrees to stay and do a written account of what he witnessed. And what's interesting about this is that the book itself is a written account of these crazy things that are happening. So Ivan is now writing something truly authentic, almost like Bulgakov knew this would be a masterpiece, but who knows. All right, so chapter 9. So back at Berlioz' old apartment, the chairman of the Tenants Association, Nicanor, who is a new character that we're introduced to in this chapter, Nicanor Ivanovich, he is receiving many claims on Berlioz's old living space, so everybody wants it. It should also be noted that in the Soviet Union at this time, there was a major housing shortage, so any vacant living spaces was highly sought after. So this means that Nicanor has a very powerful position, being the one who gets to decide who gets the vacant living space. So when Nicanor goes up to Berlioz's old apartment, he sees a man sitting at Berlioz's old desk wearing a checkered jacket. Nicanor asks this man if he's official, like, are you an official person or not? And the man simply says, well, what's the difference between official and unofficial? Today I could be official, and tomorrow I could not be official. So this is kind of another jab at kind of like the arbitrary bureaucracy that Bulgakov was living in. Nicanor argues that he hasn't received any notice about the new occupant, but the mysterious man tells him to check his briefcase, and to Nicanor's surprise, he finds a letter from Stoyopa in favor of what the mysterious man has said, thus terminating Nicanor's ability to really argue or throw the guy out, because, you know, in this world, if something's not on paper, it doesn't exist, and if it is on paper, you can't argue with it. So then Nicanor demands to see Voland, who is supposedly the new occupant of the apartment, as he said he would be in chapter 1. And what's interesting is this mysterious man, this is Koroviev, one of Voland's minions, and Koroviev says that Voland is capricious as the devil, and because, you know, he is. So Koroviev tells Nicanor that the Tenants Association will pay handsomely to Voland for him to stay. And the demons in this story often use the 7 deadly sins as a template to manipulate people and prey on them. And in this case, with Nicanor, they're using his greed. So Nicanor is offered a contract to which Voland will be paying a very high rental fee, and he agrees. More manipulation of his, more manipulation by greed. Little does he know that Voland has foreign currency, which is something that the Soviet Union would not allow. It was illegal to have foreign currency. In the Soviet Union, created a black market of currency, which was illegal, and people got locked up for that. So soon after, Nicanor is arrested for being in possession of foreign currency, and to his surprise, he now can't find the contract or anything that he was promised by Koroviev. So basically they gave him everything that he needed to be official, and then now all of a sudden he's not official. So it's another kind of poke and jab at that principle. So he gets arrested. That's the end of chapter 9. So chapter 10 starts, and the narrative now changes to the Variety Theater of Moscow, where Rimsky, the financial administrator, and Veronuka, the theater manager, are preparing everything for Voland's magic show. And the posters being used to promote the show literally read Professor Voland's Seances of Black Magic and its Exposure. So the two men get a telegram from Yalta, where Stoyopa has been supposedly disappeared to, with a mental case. They say he was shipped off there because he's gone crazy. But the two men think that it's a prank because they had just seen him the day before, and he couldn't have gone that far that fast, because geographically Yalta was 900 miles away from Moscow. They then are dumbfounded when they get another telegram right after that one that begs them to believe that it's Stiopa. Then, to their amazement, they get a third telegram containing Stiopa's handwriting telling them to watch Voland, and they're so confused because there's no way that these telegrams could be coming from 900 miles away this quickly. When Rimsky tries to call Yalta, the phone line is broken, at least to Yalta. He sends the telegrams to the cops by having the manager of theater take them to the cops, and he then tries to call Stiopa's apartment. And Koroviev answers and says Stiopa is out of town. Then he gets another telegram from Stiopa requesting 500 rubles, and Rimsky just sends him the money, and even though he's really confused, he just kind of does it. And at that same time, Veronuka is taking the telegrams to the authorities. He walks past a phone, and the phone rings. And on the other line is said to be a disgusting voice telling him not to take the telegram anywhere. But of course he refuses to listen, and he goes on his way to take the telegrams to the police office. But then he gets jumped by two thugs, which are Voland's minions. They beat him up, and they drag him to Stiopa's old apartment, where he meets a new character who is a red-haired naked woman who insists on giving him a kiss that he never actually gets, and then he just ends up fainting and passing out. And we can talk more about this character and we get to discussion if anybody wants to. So, chapter 11, we're back in the clinic with Ivan, and he is trying to write down his experiences, but he can't find a way to do it without sounding crazy. But that's also kind of the point. So a nurse takes the papers to the doctor, the ones that he's writing, and then the doctor then gives Igon a sedative to soothe him. And when he wakes up later, he realizes that he is able to look on the situation with more composure as he meditates further on his conversation with Voland. A figure appears to him and shushes him, basically appears on the balcony and goes, and that's where the chapter ends. So, let's talk about him. There's a lot to discuss here. Is there anything that jumped out at anybody initially when they were reading this?
Well, just all the absurdity of everything. I love how the characters are all kind of slowly being driven mad.
Yeah.
Because they can't explain anything that's going on. They have to force themselves.
Yeah, they know it can't explain any of the events.
In chapter 10, there's actually a quote that's really good. It's, it was necessary once, right on the spot, to invent ordinary explanations for extraordinary. So that pretty much sums it up. They refuse to believe anything supernatural. They're like, this has to be rational. And we were talking on the ride over about how silly it was because they're like, well, maybe this guy flew on a fighter jet.
Yeah.
But then they're like, well, he couldn't have flown on a fighter jet because he had no shoes on. And it's just like they're inventing all these absurd things because then they're like, well, what does it matter if he has shoes or not? He can't fly on a fighter jet anyways.
And there was just so many things they had to explain that occurred at that time.
Yeah.
At midnight.
Were there any thoughts about the conversation that Ivan had with the doctor? I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. It was good.
That's good.
Well, they use that. The thing is, I think therapists use that tactic a lot in reality, and it's kind of like the same thing as like law enforcement.
Yeah.
But you're like leading somebody into this line of thought, right? Like the doctor probably never really intended to actually let him go. He said, "I'll let you go at once," to disarm him. And then he started laying out all these crazy things that he's talking about. He's like, even if I let you go, you're going to be back here because no one's going to believe you. You're just going to be taken as a lunatic.
And then he's also he's going to be released when his entire came in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was. I would say that it was more tactical empathy than sympathy,
Yeah.
and because he actually was able to, like, he made Yvonne like the doctor had an idea in his head of what he wanted Yvonne to do, but he kind of steered the conversation in such a way to where his idea became Yvonne's idea. And so, and when something comes from somebody's own head, they're much more likely to follow through with it than if it's something that someone else just tells them to do.
And yeah, it's interesting, of course, that it comes from a position of authority. You know, like Yvonne was railing at all of like the nurses and the assistants and everything, but then as soon as the doctor comes in, he like calms down a little bit and he lets that doctor then tell him, basically convince him that he's crazy and that he needs to stay another night. It's kind of weird. Because he was so adamantly against it before that.
Yeah.
But he's also fairly tame when the nurse comes in and says it's time to bathe. And to change.
Well, yeah, he initially resolved, he's like, I'm not going to talk to her, and then he starts talking.
So the fact that they're not treating him terribly, like he's behind iron bars, they're beating him to death.
Yeah, his situation in the clinic, though, I think is kind of turning into almost like a time of clarity because there's nothing else for him to do.
Yeah.
And what I kind of like what Bulgakov is doing here is, it's like, first of all, we start out, at least for this block of chapters, we started out with Yvonne in the clinic, and then we had another chapter, then there's another chapter about Yvonne in the clinic, and then we go to another chapter, and the last one is Yvonne in the clinic. And each time we see him in the clinic, he's kind of growing a little bit. He's kind of slowly starting to have his worldview illuminated, and he's starting to come to more of a realization and kind of break free from the shackles of the worldview that he was, that he had infringed upon him being in the position he was in before.
One thing I thought was interesting though, because by the last chapter, he's literally having a conversation with himself. He has like dual personalities.
Yes, his personality literally.
They're having a conversation.
Yeah.
So, in a way, he has almost become schizophrenic, which is what Volin said was going to happen to him.
And that's exactly what they diagnosed him with too. So it's almost like, well, it's like even if he didn't have schizophrenia, them saying that he does and kind of drilling it into his head almost like gave him schizophrenia.
And it was like new Ivan and old Ivan having a conversation, right? Like old Ivan was very concerned about this magical man that like killed Berlioz and then did physically impossible things with his talking cat, and like new Ivan is more like trying to adapt to the world that he's in, right? It's saying like, oh, I think the professor's right. If I do talk about this and rant about this, like nothing good is going to happen of it, and hey, I'm comfortable here actually. And so like new Ivan is like just tempted by the comfort of giving in to be comfortable, and I don't necessarily think it's a good change. Like as an audience member, the old Ivan had more integrity, although he was clearly not very effective in following through on it, whereas new Ivan is sort of a pathetic character.
Yeah, it's an interesting take.
We'll see how it develops from here.
Right. Yeah, I mean, well, he's getting to a point now where it says he can finally write authentically. He's actually writing something that is from his own experience, and it's almost like when he was writing beforehand, he was writing all the manufactured stuff that the government wanted him to write, and now that he actually has to write something from within himself, he can't find any words for it. And I also find it interesting too how he's kind of undergoing like a spiritual awakening, but it's not like a good one. It's not like he found God or something. Like he found the devil. He had the kind of spiritual awakening that you don't want. And it kind of reminded me of that quote from Faust that Bulgakov put right in the beginning of the book. Like, he who wills evil but always means for good. It's almost like if that's what it takes to wake Yvonne up, then so be it. Were there any thoughts on what happens in the next chapter? I mean, did anyone else have any thoughts on Yvonne in the clinic? We're talking about the next chapter.
Well, I think there's like the appeal of the professor is like, you know, truck the system kind of like. Don't you think if there's a crazy guy going around and killing people, like, well, the police will catch him? Like, why do you have to be part of it?
Yeah.
And I think it's clear that like Ivan, the people don't trust the system, so it's like it's not a very good argument. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much of that in this book. Like, people always just run to the authorities, and they rely on the authorities for everything. And if you don't run to the authorities, then you're. I think even Ivan reprimanded somebody, and I think it was chapter 3 or 4, for saying like, "Aren't you being a good citizen and helping me report this crazy professor?" You know, like, because they've just been socially engineered to think that way.
But at the same time, the authorities aren't exactly competent or predictable.
Right. Yeah.
Well, the funny thing, in chapter 3, he gets that used on him by the guy in the checkered suit. When he's like, "Come on, citizen, let's yell for help."
Yeah.
And then he yells by himself.
I love it. Like, these demons are just like they're mocking the system, and they're also using it as leverage to get their way.
The one overarching theme of these 4 chapters, 5 chapters, is like none of the people are very good, and like they are all entrapped by like their base desires and
vices,
and it's like the drinking or the greed, or just like fear of authority, and it's not clear like what would happen if the devil encountered a good man, because he's just not encountering any of them.
Yeah, that's a good point. It seems like I had a similar notion when I was going through this, because it's almost like all the characters that we've met so far are like paragons in a way. Like, they're like a stand-in for some kind of ideal or some kind of idea of virtue or vice or whatever. Like, Voland is obviously an embodiment of evil, and the rest of the characters that we've met who are citizens are just kind of embodiments of like this docile sheep, that just kind of goes with whatever the system has them going with.
It's also sheep by themselves.
Yes.
Like, all these chapters is an individual encounter.
Right. Yeah.
So if we take John Milton's approach of the reason why Eve fell is because she left Adam.
That's a very interesting comparison. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to really get behind any character that we've met so far.
The landlord probably held out the best. Because at first, they were explaining his character, and they were saying, everybody wants this room, and they were trying to bribe him and do all these little favors for him, and he was so popular because he gets to decide who lives there. And then when he finds the man in the checkered suit there, and they're trying to bribe him and talk to him.
Group settings. And they might not have had as much fun.
Right, but he denied. He didn't at first. He was like, "I don't want to take this bribe, and you guys need to leave and stuff like this." And then he finally decided to take it, and he named a number that was not that crazy. I mean, $500 a night. It's kind of crazy, but I mean, he's assuming this guy's famous and blah blah blah. And then the man in the checkered suit coerces him into getting an even higher amount. He's like, "Just indulge your greed. Just take even more. Why not? You can take advantage of this stranger. Why wouldn't you do it?" So they're feeding people these things.
Yeah, so you're referring to Nicanor Ivanovich?
Yeah.
Yeah, he, what I found kind of interesting about him is Bulgakov seems to really love this idea of making deals with the devil, because it's happening over and over in this story, and this is one example where Nicanor Ivanovich, he basically takes the deal, and it's the way the devil operates is he promises you something, then he never gives it to you, but then he takes everything else from you. And so he took the deal, and he never got any profit from it. I mean, it wasn't even like, oh well, you'll get to like enjoy this money for like maybe a week or a month, and then I'm gonna spring on you. But there was none of that. Just right away, he takes the money or he makes the deal, and there was a forged contract that magically appears in his briefcase to basically justify it. And that's the other thing about the paperwork too, is how it's like if it's not on paper, it doesn't exist, and if it is on paper, you absolutely cannot argue with it. So he can't just be like, well, I have this contract here, and that's all I really need to take advantage of this person. And then he didn't even see any benefits from any of it in the end. He just got arrested for having foreign currency that he didn't really have. Mm-hmm. He just got framed for
it's very much a monkey paw situation.
Yeah. Any thoughts on?
But it's also interesting. We haven't touched on chapter 7 yet, because how the contract, everyone doesn't remember it, and they every time they go to verify it, everything prevents that from happening, and they're more isolated.
Can you expand on that?
Like Nicanor, he didn't, he was like, hey, it's not bad.
Yeah.
He's like, it's in your briefcase.
Yeah.
And he pulled it out with his signature.
Yeah.
He didn't remember signing it,
yeah.
But he didn't question it either.
Yeah.
He's like, my signature's on it, I must have done this.
I mean, I think he does call
it. Also, it's kind of pride that you're not willing to pause and ask for help. Especially, I forget the name of the character in chapter 7. But because he questions the whole affair of signing it and even meeting the act. And you could just tell his pride is holding him back from double checking.
Yeah, that's another one of the 7 deadly sins that they always play on. And I think that's something that's worth keeping in mind too for the rest of the book is, in his case, it was pride, and Nick and Mitch's case, it was...
pride
and wrong.
We can't forget that.
Yeah. Gluttony. Sure. Yeah, because that's going to continue throughout the entire novel, is whenever the demons get somebody, they always get them on one of the 7 deadly sins.
Those cats.
Yeah. Then I thought just the hilarious absurdity of a cat drinking vodka in his apartment.
I just want to mention that not all cats are evil.
Yeah. It's just one that's drinking vodka in a guy's apartment.
Russian cat.
Black bipedal.
Black cat named Bakamot.
Yeah. They're named after demons. I suspect them. I mean, suspect all cats of being up to a little bit of good, but usually not.
Suspect all.
Not usually diabolical.
Yeah, I thought the whole thing that happened with Veranuka in the next chapter was also kind of crazy. Because he did end up resisting. Mm-hmm. He resisted the phone call, and then he just got jumped. Yeah. And then he got beaten up. And I thought it was also kind of funny the way, this was like comic macabre at its finest, in my opinion, when that one, I think it was Azazello, when he punched Veranuka, it said that when he hit him in the face, there was a giant clash of thunder and lightning that happened at the same time, which I thought was pretty funny. So then, when they beat him up, it's almost like honestly, I highly doubt Bulgakov was thinking of this, but what it reminded me of is it's almost like when you look at the stories of the great ascetics, when the demons can't break them mentally, they manifest themselves to them physically. And that's been true for basically the entire tradition of Christianity. Like St. Anthony got attacked by demons physically because they couldn't break him mentally, and up as recently as the 20th century, St. Joseph the Hessens was attacked by demons because they couldn't break him mentally. Same with St. Solon. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
It was interesting, but it was also a little confusing that in this case and in the Yalta case, like the demons went from manipulation into like straight up like exercise of power. Mm-hmm. I thought that was odd.
Yeah, this is the first time they've ever like strongman somebody and used like I guess
It took two of them too.
gang tactics. Yeah. Yeah, because usually like up until then, you're right. The manipulation's been very, very subtle. It's been just kind of playing on people's weaknesses and everything, and then this one guy they can't play on his fear, so they just attack him and beat him up.
Yeah, it's weird too. They drag him to the apartment and then they bring in the red-haired woman.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they try to go back to like a passion, like they're trying to go to like lust or something. And then he resists that. He's like, he didn't want to kiss her, and then he just passes out. And it says in that chapter he never got the kiss, or he never felt it, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, slight spoiler alert. I mean, I think everybody knows this. That is an evil, demonic vampire succubus named Hela. She's one of the entourage. She's basically a vampire, and Bulgakov. I don't know if he read Bram Stoker's Dracula. Part of me wants to assume he did, but
He at least had to be familiar with the plot.
yeah. Well, one interesting thing that Bram Stoker did with vampires that people weren't doing before is he kind of turned vampirism into a contagion. So vampires come from people who were bitten by other vampires. Whereas if you look at traditional folklore about strigoi, that's not really what happens. It's some kind of virus, some kind of sickness, or some kind of birth defect. Or then the Legends of the Ricolacus, it's like a demon-possessed corpse. And here, when we see this vampire, if she, let's just put it this way, without getting into too many spoilers for people listening who haven't read it, but if she bit him, I think it would be very apparent that Bulgakov was taking influence from Bram Stoker. But yeah,
it seems like this black magic show is kind of maybe the point or the goal that the devil has in coming to Moscow, or at least one of them. It seems like he's all of his energies are kind of on focused on making this black magic show happen. So I think that's going to be
the fact that also that granted it's a new act, but everyone is coming in for the cheap tickets, so they're not willing to pay full price for it.
but I think doesn't it say that the show sold out?
Yeah, but only at the reduced rate.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, and what I find interesting about that too is that there's clearly public interest in this.
Yes.
And that goes back to something that we were talking about, I think, in the second class. I think you brought this up, Jacob, when Ivan steals the icons and the candle, he has this religious impulse. I think what we're kind of seeing now is he had a religious impulse towards good things like icons and candles. He kind of just grabbed those things out of instinct and then he dumped himself in the river to clean himself up or whatever. And I think what we're seeing here is almost like an inverse of that, where when people hear black magic, they get fascinated and they buy up all the tickets because there's still that religious void that is going to get filled with something. The atheism is not enough, and I think it's safe to assume Bulgakov understands that.
Well, wouldn't that happen in America?
No, well,
People would be excited about the black magic show because they don't really believe in it, but they want to be thrilled.
yeah, they kind of want to experience it in sort of a safe space, or they just kind of want
It's like a ghost tour.
yeah.
You were being let in it.
I mean,
Yeah.
the word seance is in the poster for the.
Yeah.
Well, they also made a special note that people only started flocking there in droves once they saw what was on the new playbill. So it's this desire for that kind of thing, for the supernatural. They want to experience it, and especially when they live in a society where they even mentioned they were surprised that they allowed that show to happen.
And what's shocking also about this show is it has no finite end starting that night, but it's going to be running without an end date, which is very unusual for a show.
That's a good observation. Well, does that idea, if you follow that train of thought, where do you think that's?
It just shows just how popular it is and just how then it's going to be mainstream in Russia.
Yeah. Are there any thoughts on why the devil wants to do a black magic show of all things? Why not, why not become like a politician and then get all the power and change all the policies and change all the legislation? Because he could clearly do that because he can forge documents out of thin air. Why?
Because he doesn't want to exercise direct power over people. He wants to tempt them
and drive them insane.
Or corrupt them.
Like, because they're also playing up this part, like the expose, but like he's going to be doing legitimate magic.
Yeah.
So like they're not going to be able, their rationality is not going to be able to expose him. Mm-hmm. And so everybody there is probably just going to go mad.
And it's like, I think like the magic show is sort of like a stand-in for media or entertainment. Definitely is the way that devil prefers to use.
And by a show, you can have a repeat experience and keeping enticed in. And it can be more an experience owned by the commoners. That's then, often with the show, then there's a mimic done. So you're going to talk about it afterwards with your friend, you're going to mime it. And then it's just going to carry on.
Yeah.
Further than it would just be if it's outlaid legislation.
I also heard a quote once, and I can't remember who it was attributed to, but it was like something to the effect of like, why would you want to be a politician when you could be the one who influences the politicians?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like,
that's why you want to be first lady. Like,
or one of media.
Yeah.
Like the Sulzbergers are more powerful than the Bidens.
Yeah, I mean,
and they are, our whole country is like a giant bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Like all these corporations who have influence over our political figures, like they're not in the firing line generally, but they have all this extra power.
Sulzbergers, by the way, the family that owns the New York Times. New York Times. It's a family.
Yes, that's true. They've owned it for many generations.
I think over 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Larry Fink is more powerful than pretty much every president. BlackRock? Yes. Yep. Because he is where they get all their money from.
Yeah, money, entertainment, media.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Like, why not? Why shouldn't the devil be a banker? I mean, politics isn't where the power is, right? Money is. So.
Because the bankers don't have, maybe they're already corrupted, I don't know. Maybe they're already on the team.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's something.
Also, it's the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So, well, I don't know how. What's
money
the bankers like?
Greed is only one passion.
Mm-hmm. That's the magic show.
But it's, yeah.
It's only one passion, so I think a show, you're able to capture more passions in the end.
I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think that the reason that he wants to be an entertainer is because if you think about what entertaining does, okay, if we think about an actor and a mechanic who fixes your car, or a plumber who fixes the leaks in your house, who's more useful, practically speaking? Like the blue collar worker, mechanic and plumber. But why is it that we never put posters of the plumbers or the doctors that heal our sicknesses on our walls? Why don't we carry pictures of them? Why aren't we like fans of them, so to speak? Whereas like with a musician or an actor, we put posters of them on our walls and everything. Like, I think it's because like the entertainment and the arts have a way of getting into the soul, kind of getting into like the most intimate parts of somebody. So that's my own speculation or theory, take it or leave it. That's why I think the devil comes as an entertainer, because he can access the soul. It's one thing to solve somebody's practical problems, it's another thing to infiltrate their soul, and that's what I think entertainment is.
Also because it's harmless.
Yeah, at least it comes off that way.
Right, because if he's a policeman, people will resist a corrupt.
Well, and also it's legitimate. Like, he had to get a contract, get a venue. yeah, the sell tickets, like you legitimately have to be, you're getting in public eye, like knowing that they had to get the show approved.
Yeah. Are there any closing thoughts on these mad chapters? Anything specifically that stood out to somebody? Any points of progression? Any new themes that have jumped out at anybody?
Something about like the pleasantness of prison,
Mm-hmm.
and like how Ivan is coming to peace with like just the fact that he's like comfortable there. Maybe the world is simpler there. Like he's being treated really well, but the only downside of being in prison is that he's like cut off from meaningful activity, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he's also kind of cut off from meaningful activity outside of the prison,
Yeah.
because he's in the Soviet Union. So it's like, well, if you're going to be in a prison out there, well, you might as well be in the prison in here, where people come and smile at you and say good morning, feed you a nice breakfast.
That was a good point too, because he got a really good breakfast that like most people.
Oh, maybe I thought about it.
He got 2 eggs, like white bread with butter, and then something else.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like most people are probably like starving or running low on food. Like they're
Just for clothes.
Oh yeah, the border.
I think that
into
that is a bit of a satirical take, like being locked up in an insane asylum is like better than just normal life. And
It's improved your life, like.
That's actually what I was thinking too, is the character progression of Ivan. And we are introduced to a very mysterious, strange character at the end of that chapter, who I think we all know who that is.
I thought it was Ballman.
Oh, okay. Well, then, we won't say who it is, we won't spoil anything. Alright, well, that being said, if there's no more thoughts, I mean, I think we've been going almost an hour. So,
4 people.
4 people.
Carrying it.
Yep. I don't know. I kind of like the small group. It's nice. Not that they're being.
It makes it easier for the style. It would be a hard book to just jump in.
Yeah. Right. I think so too. I mean, it is rather complex, but everybody voted for it. So
Easier than Dostoevsky.
that's true.
I mean, it goes faster. It goes down easier. But I mean, maybe more confusing in terms of like structure.
Yeah.
I mean, like it's not a straight up narrative.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the whole surreal thing that wasn't really around in Dostoevsky's day.
Yeah.
But Dostoevsky still loved a rabbit trail. So, and that, for me personally, just
What author doesn't like Rabbit Trail? Give me an example.
it's not like the rabbit trail. I mean, The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis is pretty direct.
I'll go.
So, all right, we'll just do the Our Father. Our Father. Right, King. It's there. It's biggest, I guess. Merciful. Pray to our Holy Father, Lord, respect and mercy. All right, well, thank you, everybody. That was a lovely discussion.